What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and there's quite a bit to go over today when it comes to the state of Gamergate 2 and the ongoing war eclipsing the entire industry. We have some exclusives like companies being ousted for having changes implemented once Sweet Baby was brought on, and actual character models that allegedly prove how characters were race swapped once Sweet Baby pushed for it, as well as a website that is being silenced for their stance amidst the culture war, and that's crazy, and just even more stuff, so let's just get into it. Firstly, from Bounding into Comics, we have this article titled, Rumor, Compulsion Games race swapped their main character after hiring Sweet Baby Inc. The game in question is called South of Midnight, which you're seeing on screen right now. As of the making of this video, there is only this one trailer that's available for the game, so I can't really speak on how it plays exactly or anything, but I will admit that the game has a very interesting art style at least. But, unfortunately, the game does seem to be drenched in the swamps of Sweet Baby as well. And Grums, over on Twitter, ended up having not one, but two developers of this game reach out to them privately about how the game was being made internally. The two devs Grums spoke to said that DEI, or Diversity Equity Index, is ruining the games they were working on prior to them leaving these projects entirely. Besides Compulsion Games, the other dev Grums spoke to was from Avalanche Studios, the development studio that was also behind Hogwarts Legacy. These changes those devs were speaking about apparently directly relate to the massive push Microsoft has been having when it comes to their video games and media in general, where they are now deliberately enforcing DEI changes across the board for all of their games going forward. What this ultimately means is that if a game is published or financed by Microsoft in any way, that game will have to allegedly, to some capacity, adhere to the principles of wokeness, for lack of a better way of explaining it. So whether it's Halo, Gears, or whatever other game they finance and publish, these franchises and more will absolutely be drenched in the identity political ideology, and if they don't, they basically don't get made to begin with. I figure we should learn more about said guidelines, and it's actually called Project Inclusion Framework, as seen here in this official article from Microsoft Studios themselves, which is written by Katie Jo Wright, who has the most made-up job title ever seen, which is called Head of Gaming for Everyone and Sustainability at Xbox. That's a mouthful to say. Microsoft even unironically uses the ugly modern corpo art in the article like seen here on screen. Whenever I see art like this in something where any company is pushing any policies, it immediately comes across as tone-deaf and devoid of any real humanity behind it. I figure before we get back to Grums, we learn more about what exactly it is that's pushing these Sweet Baby practices. So from Microsoft themselves, they said via a press release, and I quote, "Today was a great day for Team Xbox as we shared publicly for the first time the Gaming for Everyone Product Inclusion Framework, a set of actionable resources meant to help game developers and the wider games industry weave intentionality and inclusion into the products they make, in order to reach a broader set of players worldwide in a meaningful way. At Xbox, our mission is to deliver the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet. For years, we've been on a journey to help our teams with the tools and knowledge they need to deliver more inclusive products and games, as we aspire to reach the 3+ billion players on the planet. In 2015, we formed Gaming for Everyone, our inclusive growth strategy and commitment to bring intentional inclusion through product. We wanted to help more players experience the joy of gaming and saw some early momentum and big wins across Team Xbox, like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, a wireless controller designed for gamers with limited mobility that launched in 2018, as well as Sea of Thieves' inclusive pirate customizations, which allowed players to select characters that most represented themselves across gender, clothing, hair, body type, and more. We knew driving inclusion through product would be a journey, one we'd continue to learn, iterate, and improve upon. As we continue to bring Gaming for Everyone to life, we realized the need to create common language and resources to help make this work more tangible. By sharing the Xbox Gaming for Everyone Product Inclusion Framework publicly, we hope this enables more game developers to bring intentionality and inclusion to their products worldwide. It is important to note that the Product Inclusion Framework is not meant to be a checklist or any sort of mandate of what makes an inclusive game. Rather, the resources and tools within the framework are designed to be a guide for developers to help enable them to make an intentional decision to either open or leave a door closed. based on the game experience they're trying to create. The goal of bringing this level of intentionality into games is to expand player reach and deepen player engagement in a meaningful way. That is going to look different based on different gaming experiences, so this framework was designed with that flexibility in mind." End quote. So it's good that we now know that this Katie Jo Wright confirms that Microsoft's push for inclusion is not being pushed 100% by the company. They further detail that they want these inclusive practices to be looked at as doorways, and each door opens to another set of inclusive help that developers can reach out and get assistance with. And that ultimately is up to the development studio themselves to ensure which of these inclusive doorway programs they want to use. The 4 doorways are these seen on screen here: approachability, representation, globalization, and accessibility. Some of these seem noble to an extent. I mean, accessibility makes sense. There's plenty of people out there who plays games that are, for example, disabled in some way. And I do think it's great that regardless of your medical problems or whatnot, that you can still play games. I don't think that's bad at all. Everyone should be able to enjoy video games no matter what cards they've been dealt by life. Although there was this one part in their whole speech where they say they want this program to invoke the creation of new terminologies, which is corporate speak for we want to pander by making up new words in order to virtue signal. What Katie Jo Wright is saying there is Microsoft is working to eventually create more nonsense terms akin to something like Latinx, which of course is supposed to be the inclusive, non-binary way of referring to Latin individuals. But for anyone out there who speaks those languages, they know that the language is strictly based on male and female gendered words. There is no non-binary per se. But that's what these practices are working to change. So while a lot of this seems wholesome on the surface, the reality is that the wholesomeness is somewhat of a smokescreen designed to lessen your defense so that you don't notice the knife that's rupturing your ribcage pretty much. Look how inclusive we're being. Look at all of these doorways. Also, if you don't call people Latinx, we'll blacklist you. Yeah, it's truly a double-edged sworded work here. So let's circle back now to Grumps and the expose he had when it comes to Sweet Baby's inclusion practices that it enforces. And the further Grumps speaks, it seems that those Microsoft inclusion practices are actually far more powerful and pushy than they make it out to be. Grumps said when he was talking to the ex-devs who worked at Compulsion and Avalanche that when Microsoft brought about this new inclusion policy, that the supposed, "oh, you don't have to use our programs or whatever doorway thing" mentality was actually a load of BS and just corporate speak. Apparently, Microsoft does indeed enforce any developer or publisher under their wing now to hire a DEI or Diversity Equity Index director onto every single project they produce going forward, so they're allegedly lying about being hands-off according to these ex-developers. Of course, these devs could be lying about this, but I personally don't think they would speak out against these things if they didn't have first-hand experience with Microsoft's new strangling policies. These devs also told Grumps that Microsoft now also enforces the inclusion of consulting firms onto all of their games going forward. And one of the practices Microsoft enforces is gender balance and hiring and promotion policies through the lens of DEI. This means that when, let's say, a higher-up position is available within a development studio or company, the promotion does not simply go to who's most capable for said job, but instead the job's position is carefully considered through the lens of pandering and inclusivity instead. So to put it simply, let's say a white straight man applies for an open leadership position, but a non-binary person of color with they/them pronouns also applies for the same position. Because of the strong-arm push of these policies by Microsoft, the likelihood is that said position will very likely go to the non-binary person of color, instead of the straight white male developer, not because they are better for the job per se, but simply because their identity is far more appetizing, if you will, to Microsoft as a whole. And because of this, you end up with a lot of people in positions of power within many of these companies that should not have said power at all. But that is what these policies enforce, allegedly of course to what's being said here. But if we look at the grander landscape of modern AAA Western gaming, this mentality is all but very likely much happening across the board right now. It is no longer whether you're good at the job or not, but what you represent that overrides your competition. It's a bleak situation to be in for sure, especially if you want to just make great video games, which doesn't seem to be the point in places like Microsoft anymore anyways. According to Grum, these changes were not really enforced until such companies like Sweet Baby Inc., which is involved with South of Midnight, which is made by Compulsion Games, as well as Contraband by Avalanche Studios. So these were normal development studios just making video games, but once the big stinky baby walked into their office, it was akin to Venom covering New York City in their symbiotic goo. Everything turned to hell and these studios became a war zone of identity politics, pretty much. According to these devs, the changes Sweet Baby brought to these games, as well as the strong arming practices enforced by Microsoft, pretty much transformed these companies into completely different looking experiences. Contraband, for example, which doesn't have gameplay available as of the making of this video, but if we go by their website, the game is described as "Welcome to Contraband, a co-op smuggler's paradise set in the fictional world of 1970s buy-in. Brought to you by Avalanche and Xbox Studios and exclusive to the Xbox and Steam and Windows PC." Okay, so it's a co-op smuggler game, again no gameplay, but it's better than nothing, I guess. Anyway, according to Grums, one of these devs said once Sweet Baby became involved, Contraband was forced to remove any gender differences when it came to the character creation system. So this means you could swap body parts any way you want to, have beards on female character models, the whole shebang. Contraband basically went from being a traditional co-op smuggler game to build your own woke character simulator once SBI was involved basically. But it gets worse because of course it does. South of Midnight also was like Contraband, but once SBI was involved, this heavily changed the game's core elements. The ex-Compulsion dev admitted that the main character, which you saw in the trailer, the black woman using voodoo magic or whatever that is, was originally a white character, and of course this is a claim that can't be proven, right? Well, turns out they actually have proof. So the ex-Compulsion dev gave Grum's actual character models of the main character from what they looked like before to what they ended up being now. So here's the original character's base model, not finished, yes, but you can see from the hair and facial structure that South of Midnight did indeed originally have a white female protagonist. And of course, here's the model now used in the game officially, which is completely different from the bone structure, hair, and everything else. These changes, according to the ex-dev, were brought from the top down and were allegedly personally pushed by Sweet Baby's co-founder Kim Belair, who of course, as you know, is also a black woman herself, and this is not the first time she's done this. As we know with Alan Wake 2, she also convinced and strong-armed Remedy into transforming Saga into a black woman over her original white woman design. The game developer article that interviewed Kyle Rowley, the director of Alan Wake 2, confirmed this. So we're noticing a pattern here, fellas, that Kim Belair of SBI deliberately uses her influence to enforce her racial identity into the game she works on, even if the devs don't agree with it. And what Grums concluded from these anonymous devs was that these changes were absolutely being deliberately done to these games in order to fit agendas, and that it was the money from Microsoft and their push of this project inclusion that results in these games that we know of, by the way, because let's be real, we don't even know exactly how deep these practices go. Sure, it's Contraband and South of Midnight right now, but remember that Microsoft owns an ungodly amount of studios at this point, all of Bethesda, Blizzard, Activision, not to mention what they already owned like 343 and others. There's a lot of stuff cooking right now, fellas, over there right now. And it's becoming increasingly worrying that these policies and the push for things like DEI directors, racial bias when it comes to promotions and more, these concepts are being spearheaded and pushed by Microsoft, as well as places like Sweet Baby Inc. that are of course contracting and paying to work on these projects. Grums finishes by saying this: "These changes do not seem to be organic, but the result of forced policies that come from the very top, powered by publishing influence and funding. Microsoft's and Xbox's project inclusion guidelines are more mandatory than claimed, which is why the whole doorway concept seems to be more BS than anything else, and those doorways are likely the job opportunities that will close off to you if you decide to not pander and bend the knee instead. It's very scary and worrying stuff, especially if you want the integrity of games to be more authentic going forward. But this is anything but that, and in terms of how far and deep this goes, my friends, I think we're only scratching the surface. And remember, we still don't know what other games are coming this year or next year completely. There could definitely be a lot more DEI-led nonsense on the way. Then there's this next story, which is honestly kind of depressing to be real with you, but it's also sobering as well to see it being so candidly spoken about like this. So on Twitter, there was this post made by someone which says, "Raise your hand if you're not a white man and you buy video games. No hate to white dudes, it's just another day in the gaming industry that minorities have to fight to prove they exist." Of course, this post went over about as well as you think. Then people found this Kelly lady was actually the head of global marketing for Xbox Studios, like all of it. And this was them virtue signaling on Twitter like this to their peers, and I just find this insane that the person in charge of the entirety of Xbox's marketing also believes that white male players are the devil. Are you understanding how Xbox seems to really be doubling down on the wokeness and Sweet Baby angle? Well, this post was then retweeted by The Quartering, which was then retweeted by Ashley St. Clair, which then was retweeted by freaking Elon Musk of all people, where he said this: "It should not be acceptable for any company in the gaming industry to be racist and sexist against white guys." And Elon's right. And of course, whenever he tweets something, the eyes of millions see it. I mean, look at the view count on that single tweet. 24.4 million people, dude. That's a lot of people seeing the head of global marketing for Xbox virtue signal and denounce white male players like this. Of course, then in response, the global head said this: "I deleted my last tweet because it was poorly worded, lacked context, and didn't accurately reflect how I feel. The gaming industry is incredibly diverse, and the more voices we have creating, watching, and playing games, the better. There's room for everyone." She clearly realized, oh crap, my virtue signaling tweet was just seen by literal countries worth of people that could be potential buyers. And she of course attempted to save face and then even limits who can reply, which is always a telltale sign of totally being open to outside ideas, except not really at all. But what was really eye-opening about this story was the lack of coverage of it when it came to websites. Why weren't many websites covering the story? I mean, this is the head of global marketing for Xbox that's saying this. Isn't this something people should know? Well, the truth is sadly very worrying to say the least. So let's head over to Niche Gamer. They're a website that has covered a lot of Sweet Baby stuff and more in the past. They're also one of the only websites back in the day that actually spoke out against Zoe Quinn amidst the death of Alec Holoka during the first Gamergate. But they were asked by fans, why did they not make an article about this head of Xbox? Well, they said on Twitter, "While we do agree with the base sentiment of gaming companies overplaying their hands per se, unfortunately we can't cover this particular story or more stories like it without potentially getting punished by the PR firms hired by those same game companies, who we have to rely on to get access to video games for review and coverage purposes, ranging from smaller devs to mid-size operations to even AAA game companies, publishers alike. Because a lot of those same PR people support the people who hold these similar views like what Elon is referring to here, we are already having significant issues and experiencing roadblocks regarding getting access to AAA titles because we have covered the Sweet Baby Inc. stories alone. It's quite unfortunate." A commenter asked why, and then they further stated, "You're right, and unfortunately we'll probably face more backlash from tweeting like this, but it's not fair to be called out by KIA and other places for refusing to cover stories. In an ideal world, you'd think talking about this without bias would be worth something, but it isn't." So what we're seeing here is an entire website not necessarily bending the knee fully per se, like I would say, oh, boycott Niche Gamer. No, don't do that. They do good work, and I think that they're admitting this in a public forum as they have is actually very transparent and good of them. They're telling the viewers out there like you and me that, hey look, we want to cover these things, but we also realize that we're a part of this monolithic machine called video games. And the truth is that if we report on things like this, Xbox head being a moron for example, it would of course unfavorably represent Xbox, which is a massive brand in gaming. And unfortunately, even Niche Gamer has to play ball, if you will, to an extent when it comes to the inner policies and ideologies of the video game industry. But that's why I exist. I don't care if Xbox blacklists me because I don't even own an Xbox to begin with. I think their console is ass, and most of their games that were great were made like 15 years ago at this point. They've been falling apart ever since PlayStation spin kicked them in the trachea when Xbox was trying to remove used games from the market. And Game Pass has done nothing but ruin their quality even further, and I can say these things because again, I don't care if Xbox hates or blacklists me. Oh no, what will I do knowing I won't have exclusive access to the new pronouns they add in some update to Sea of Thieves? See if I care, I don't. Redfall and Starfield look terrible, I don't care what they think or say, and their head of global marketing saying what they're saying? is insanely out of touch in my opinion, and the fact this mentality is held not by some low-level employee, but a person with power like this it's not good, I'll tell you that. It doesn't surprise me either, cause like I said, Xbox has been limping in the quality department for years now. And there is no shortage of underwhelming experiences coming from them. Sure, they sometimes hit some gold like Hi-Fi Rush, but generally speaking, everything they release, it just disappoints their fans. Halo Infinite disappointed everybody. Maybe it's better now, but the damage is done. Same with Gears, Starfield, and more. Maybe if Microsoft cared more about quality instead of virtue signaling, we'd have a better set of games from them. And I think it's awful that places like Niche Gamer are getting strong-armed like this into silent obedience. It's not right. And it proves yet again that the gaming journalism of today is not real journalism. It is mostly manufactured propaganda that must be reviewed and okayed by these corporations in order to have them be published. Otherwise, you end up like Niche Gamer who gets disciplined for wrongthink. Why do you think you won't see an IGN or GameSpot speaking about these sorts of things? Cause they're barely even game journalists anymore. They're mostly just leeches that feed off the big companies' milkers, and it's pathetic to see. And that's why so many of these sites like Kotaku and others hate people like myself or Yellowflash. Because not only can we get information out in a reasonable time frame, but we are also not constrained by the company politics that suffocate them on a daily basis. What's IGN going to do to me if I say their journalism sucks? Nothing. Hey IGN, your journalism sucks. And besides maybe Destin Legary and Ryan McCaffrey, the majority of their staff is your typical woke lunatics that just agree with one another on everything. They're long past the glory days of, say, Podcast Beyond, where Colin Moriarty and Greg Miller were doing the Lord's work back in the day. Now Greg Miller is also a paid shill as well over at Kinda Funny. Will I be disciplined for not being a fan of Kinda Funny? I don't really care either way, cause they threw Colin Moriarty under the bus when he made that joke on International Women's Day. And then Colin founded Last Stand Media and has had the most successful gaming Patreon ever since. And notice that of all of the most successful platforms with fans is Last Stand, which Colin founded. Yet they are pretty much blacklisted by all major companies, even PlayStation pretty much, even though they operate the biggest and most successful PlayStation podcast in the world right now. Yet Kinda Funny with their diminishing numbers keeps getting access to all the games early instead of Last Stand. Clearly it's not a number things at all. And in reality what it is really is simply that Kinda Funny plays nice with the companies and Last Stand doesn't. And that's what this all is. It's all about licking the boot or you're kicked with the same boot instead. It's pathetic and it's why I can't listen to some of these websites or shills because they are not willing to speak on what really matters in gaming. To them, everything is great, there is nothing wrong, and there's absolutely nothing nefarious happening. How can you be in your position of power like that and not realize how messed up everything is? The only tangible answer is simply because they want it to stay that way because they're in that club to begin with. So no thanks, and Xbox is insane for having someone who hates players like that in a position of power. Speaking of hating players, let's finish with a little interview that got unearthed surrounding someone who works at Compulsion Games. The same company that got ruined by Sweet Baby, you know, the people who are making South of Midnight. So there was this article resurfaced for 2022 where Compulsion Games community manager was interviewed. They're also a Twitch streamer called Pika Cholita, and they have some interesting opinions to say the least. They said some victim mindset stuff like, I mean, we see who sits at the top of society in general, it's that and also subconscious bias and subconscious racism. When most people think about gaming, they have one image in mind and it's probably some white guy. Very interesting. This is the same person, by the way, who thinks white and Asian people are the same and has gone on record saying they hate gamers in general, yet they work in games anyway. But there's also this one part which really went, okay, this is who Compulsion Games wants to represent their company, which is this part in the article which says, to really get a sense of who she is though, look at her feed. Her tweets and retweets are both blunt and fearless, and they might not be for everyone. Robinson is okay with that. You're not going to tickle some people's fancy being outspoken or tweeting things like I do when I say white male gamers were a mistake, she says. But her messages on behalf of marginalized communities, whether celebrating black voices, protesting against ableism, or advocating for women's, queers, and indigenous rights, will catch your attention and for good cause. There you have it. So not only has Compulsion Games been completely infiltrated by the mind virus, and forcibly changed their main character's skin color and all that because of said demands, But their community manager hates white people. They just straight up hate them, and believes anyone who's white that plays video games were a mistake, and this is championed by this interview, by the way, too. This is considered right think in their eyes, and then you tell me why these sorts of games and companies that are pushing so heavily back against the Steam Curator tool, Brutus, and the Sweet Baby backlash, because these people, unequivocally, they hate you if you're a white person. And they want you to not only know that, but accept it and denounce it. I'm good, thanks. I will not be buying South of Midnight. I won't even play it if it's free at some point. Compulsion Games is a hateful studio that wishes I didn't exist to begin with, and I cannot in good faith support a company like this. And the fact Microsoft protects companies like that is disgusting as well, not to mention that their head of marketing hates people like me as well for no other reason than I exist. This industry is so racist, yet it's totally fine because they have the right politics in their minds. I will reject these games and their practices, and I will be there to wave as Compulsion Games falls to ruin. But as you can see, the rot runs insanely deep, and as time goes on, we will only keep learning and unearthing more. So what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and share the video if you enjoyed it, and thanks to my patrons as well. Racism is not cool at all, and it saddens me to see it so prevalent in modern gaming like this. We are all more than the color of our skin, but in these people's eyes, we are nothing but maggots. It's pathetic. But have a wonderful day, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.